Exactly that.
No. I'm going to come to the humble address in a moment, but the Prime Minister cannot blame the process. He did know it was on Google. If the Conservative Research Department could find this information out, why couldn't Number 10? On the 10th of September, when we knew this, I asked him at that dispatch box, he gave Mandelson his full confidence at that dispatch box, not once, but twice. He only sacked him after pressure from us. I am asking the Prime Minister something very specific, not about the generalities of the full extent. Can the Prime Minister tell us, did the official security vetting he received mention Mandelson's ongoing relationship with the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein?
So clear. Prime Minister.
Yes, it did. As a result, various questions were put to him. I intend to disclose to this House all of them, the national security, prejudice to international relations on one side. I want to make sure this House sees the full documentation, so it will see for itself the extent to which time and time again Mandelson completely misrepresented the extent of his relationship with Epstein and lied throughout the process, including in response to the due diligence.
Mr. Speaker, I think it is shocking what the Prime Minister has just said. How can he stand up there saying that he knew, but he just asked Peter Mandelson if the security vetting was true or false? This is a man who had been sacked from cabinet twice already for unethical behaviour. That is absolutely shocking. And that is why later today, my party will call on the government to release all documents relating to Mandelson's appointment, not just the ones the Prime Minister wants us to see. Because this government is trying to sabotage that release with an amendment to let him choose what we see, the man who appointed Mandelson in the first place. Labour MPs now have to decide if they want to be accessories to his cover-up. Can the Prime Minister guarantee that he won't remove the whip if they refuse to vote for his whitewash amendment?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the first exemption is in relation to anything that could compromise national security. That is not a small matter, and many members on the benches opposite will know precisely why that needs to be in the exemption. When we were drafting humble addresses, when we were sitting over there, we always made sure that exemption was in because we knew how important it was to the then government. I don't think I've seen a humble address without that in, because and just to be clear, to vote to release something that would prejudice national security is wrong in principle. The second exemption is in relation to things that would prejudice international relations. There will be discussions about security and intelligence and trade, which are highly sensitive to the two countries involved and to third countries. Well, they have to ask themselves whether they want to vote to prejudice our national security. I don't think they do. I don't think, in fairness, that they do. But can I reassure the House, Mr. Speaker? Let me reassure the House that the process for deciding what falls into those categories will not be a political process. It will be led by the Cabinet Secretary, supported by government legal teams. So they will be looking at the question of prejudice. They will be making that decision. The only additional thing I just want to put before the House, because there was a discussion this morning with the Metropolitan Police, is that we are in discussions with them about any material that they're concerned will prejudice their investigation. We're at an early stage of that discussion, but I didn't want to have the House not know that that discussion is going on.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is talking about national security. The national security issue was appointing Mandelson in the first place. And what he has said about the humble address is a red herring. To those Labour MPs who were not there in the last Parliament, let me tell them, humble addresses already exempt genuine national security. This is not about national security, this is about his job security. His amendment lets him withhold anything to do with international relations. But this whole appointment is to do with international relations. So if they're voting for it, they are voting for the cover-up. If the Prime Minister is serious about national security concerns, then he should ask the Intelligence and Security Committee to decide which documents should be released. Will he commit to doing so here and now?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've set out the process. It won't be a political process. It will be led by the Cabinet Secretary, supported by the government legal teams. But I'm pleased that she, I think, now accepts that at least the first exemption that we've written in to the amendment to the petition is the right amendment in relation to prejudice national security. But she and others behind her will understand that because of the breadth of what's asked for, and we're doing everything we can to make sure this is fully transparent and disclosed, but she and those behind her will understand from their own experience in government the sensitivity of information about security and intelligence and trade relations that are inevitably caught in exchanges of the nature that are being asked for. And it is right that anything that prejudices, not touches on, prejudices international relations is protected within the disclosure.
Can we bed not?
If that was really the case, then he wouldn't mind if the ISC had a look. And let's be clear, he says the Cabinet Secretary makes it non-political, but that doesn't make it independent. What we want is an independent look. The ISC is independent. The Cabinet Secretary works for him. We know that there will be a cover-up because this implicates the Prime Minister and his Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, a protege of Peter Mandelson. The Prime Minister chose to inject Mandelson's poison into the heart of his government on the advice of Morgan McSweeney. His catastrophic lack of judgment, telling us now that he did know, has harmed the special relationship. It has endangered national security. It's not the humble address, it's him. It's compromised our diplomacy, and it has embarrassed our nation. After all of this, does he have the same full confidence in Morgan McSweeney that he had in Peter Mandelson?
Prime Minister.
Morgan McSweeney is an essential part of my team. He helped me change the Labour Party and win an election. Of course I have confidence in him. But, Mr. Speaker, whatever is slung across this dispatch box, I don't think it's right for the Cabinet Secretary to be denigrated in that way and to suggest that he would be involved in a cover-up. There's the politics that comes over the dispatch boxes, but I honestly don't think it's right to impugn the Cabinet Secretary in that way. And I suspect in their heart of hearts, many on those benches would agree. Mr. Speaker, I'm as angry as anyone about what Mandelson has been up to. The disclosures that have been made this week of him passing sensitive information at the height of the response to the 2008 financial crash is utterly shocking and appalling. He's betrayed our country. He's lied repeatedly. He's responsible for a litany of deceit. But this moment demands not just anger, but action. And that's why we've moved quickly, referring material to the police, publishing legislation so it can remove titles from disgraced politicians, and stripping Mandelson of his Privy Councillorship. That is what the public expect, and that is what we will do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every month, people across our constituencies are injured by illegal e-bikes being ridden at 30, 40 and 50 miles per hour through our town centres and parks. But for every illegal e-bike that the police seize and crush, another 10 hit our streets because they are too freely available to buy. That's why Cumbria's Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner and 28 other police commissioners across the UK are now backing my bill, which would ban the sale of illegal e-bikes. Will the Prime Minister set out what action the government will take to protect the public and ban the sale of these monster bikes?
Prime Minister.
Can I pay tribute to my honourable friend? She's a tireless campaigner to stop these antisocial, dangerous bikes terrorising communities. Our crime and policing bill means police can seize bikes without issuing a warning and destroy them. And product safety law means authorities have the powers to intervene to stop the sale of unsafe e-bikes but I share her determination to get these bikes off our streets.
Sir Ed David, leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Mr Speaker, can I thank you and the Prime Minister for your responses to my tribute to Jim Wallace on Monday, and urge the whole House to read the wonderful tributes made to Jim in the other place yesterday. Mr Speaker, I've been thinking how it must feel for the victims of Jeffrey Epstein and their families, hearing more and more stories of how rich, powerful men were currying favour with a paedophile sex trafficker, such as Peter Mandelson, sending government secrets to help Epstein enrich himself further. Seeing Mandelson made ambassador to the United States, even after his links to Epstein had been extensively reported by both the Financial Times and Channel 4 News. So can the Prime Minister tell us, given he now admits he knew about those links, before he gave such an important job to one of Epstein's closest friends, did he think at all about Epstein's victims?
Mr Speaker, we looked at the material. There was a process. There was then, as he will understand, there was then a security vetting exercise as well. And that's why I started by saying all of our thoughts are with the victims of Epstein. He is right at the beginning of his question to express anger at the material that has recently come out in relation to sensitive information in the aftermath of the 2008 crash. And that is why yesterday, working with the Cabinet Secretary, we referred a material to the police, which has now led to the criminal investigation that is going to follow.
Mr Speaker, I think the victims of Jeffrey Epstein deserve far better than that. They deserve Peter Mandelson not being appointed in the first place. We don't even know the full extent of the British establishment's involvement in his appalling crimes, or how many British girls and young women were trafficked by him. So we need a full public inquiry, both to get justice for the victims and to protect our national security. Mr Speaker, the Polish government think Epstein may have been spying for Vladimir Putin. Is the Prime Minister concerned that Peter Mandelson may have been leaking state secrets, not just to a paedophile American financier, but also a Russian agent?
Well, Mr Speaker, he talks of the public inquiry. Obviously, the focus now has to be on the criminal investigation which has started. As he knows, that investigation will go wherever the evidence leads it, and I've made it absolutely clear that the government will cooperate, as he would expect, with that criminal investigation wherever it goes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I welcome the news that Bristol East will be getting another 3 breakfast clubs. I've seen how these clubs aren't just about making sure that no child starts the school day hungry. They're also about giving staff the extra time to spend with the children and to spot whether there might be trouble at home. And on that note, can I urge the Prime Minister to work with schools on a manifesto commitment to identify children with parents in prison to make sure that those children get all the support that they need?
Can I thank her for raising this and confirm that we're looking at how we can strengthen the support in place for these children so no child falls between the cracks. Free breakfast clubs mean every child is fed and ready to learn, and I'm delighted to see 3 more in her constituency as she references. But I also want to mention Rushbrook Primary Academy, Oasis Academy Aspinall, Longsight Community Primary, St Bernard's Roman Catholic Primary School Manchester, all soon operating free breakfast clubs in Gorton and Denton.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Llyfarydd. The victims and survivors of Epstein and his circle of overprivileged elite are at the forefront of my mind here and now. Mandelson, we now know, described Epstein's release from prison after being sentenced for child sex offences as Liberation Day. This man's association with Epstein was known when the Prime Minister personally appointed him as the UK's ambassador to the USA. How can we trust the Prime Minister's judgment? And in questioning that, how can we trust him to remain as Prime Minister?
Can I join her in the disgust in the comments that she just read out? But to be absolutely clear, the scale and the extent of the relationship between Mandelson and Epstein was not disclosed. On the contrary, it wasn't just not disclosed. Mandelson lied throughout the process and beyond the process. He lied, and he lied again to my team.
Luke Charters.
Speaker, an EU agri-food deal would boost exports and cut supermarket prices. The CBI backs it, and according to Best of Britain's polling, 62% of the public do. But surprise, surprise, Reform oppose it. I thought the member for Ashfield wanted 30p food. Does the Prime Minister agree that while some opposite prefer temper tantrums, Brussels, this Labour government must build closer ties with Europe to cut the price of the weekly shop?
Well, Mr. Speaker, right, the deal that we've struck with the EU means lower prices at the checkout, more choice on the shelf, and more money in people's pockets. It's good for British fishers and farmers who face less red tape, selling our world-class produce into a crucial market. It comes alongside the opportunity for young people to work, travel across Europe, the work we're doing to cut energy bills and closer work on defence. All of this is opposed by Reform and the Tories, who sold the myth, botched Brexit, and left families and businesses paying the price.
Charlie Juhas.
Mr. Speaker, now I'll give the Prime Minister some brief respite from Peter Mandelson. However, he will also be familiar with the name Phil Shiner, the disgraced lawyer who was struck off and convicted for repeatedly inventing vexatious cases against British troops in Iraq. So it is something of a surprise that the Prime Minister authored a chapter in Mr. Shiner's book about pursuing our veterans via the ECA charge. So can I ask him specifically, was he ever instructed by Mr. Shiner's law firm, Public Interest Lawyers, to act in any legal case?
Let me be absolutely clear about this. As soon as there were any allegations of wrongdoing by Phil Shiner, I've had absolutely nothing to do with him.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Aldershot and Farnborough this year, we are looking forward to hosting the National Celebrations for Armed Forces Day in the home of the British Army. Businesses in my community welcome this government's record investment in defence in the years ahead, but our banks still struggle to lend to defence companies because of international regulations. Will the Prime Minister ensure that the UK works with Canada and our other allies to found the multilateral Defence, Security and Resilience Bank so that we can get money moving to our defence industries, get our armed forces what they need and stand firm against our adversaries?
Well, I'm delighted that Aldershot will be hosting Armed Forces Day because they've got a hard-working Labour MP and a Labour council. Our historic defence spending uplift must be an engine for growth and jobs here in the United Kingdom. That's why we're committed to spending an extra £2.5 billion with SMEs. I do agree with her. It's vital that we work in lockstep with our allies, particularly in Europe, to enhance and align our defence capabilities. We're therefore working at pace to identify the most effective mechanisms for greater multilateral cooperation.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, for months our communities in Epping have been deeply distressed by the Bell Hotel reopening as an asylum hotel. My thoughts remain with the victims of the sexual assaults, including the 14-year-old Epping schoolgirl. That trauma compounded by the offender's mistaken release from prison. Weekly protests continue, some of which have become violent, with injuries to 10 brave police officers. I am very grateful to the Asylum Minister for meeting with me recently about this untenable situation. But will the Prime Minister please listen, act now, close the Bell Hotel once and for all, and help restore our town of Epping?
As he knows, we are committed to ending the use of all hotels. There are now just under 200 compared to the 400 under the previous government. And where military sites are used, safety and security of local communities is our priority.
Jonathan Blash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hartlepool has now the third highest number of children in care in England, fuelled by Southern Council shipping families to my town, blowing a £6 million hole in our budget, a deficit that my brilliant Labour Council has already halved. but there is nothing left to cut. And when percentage increases in funding mean less in Hartlepool than almost anywhere else in the country, but a child in care costs exactly the same, the fair funding settlement announced in December does not go far enough. I am fighting non-stop for a better deal for my town because I will not accept one of the poorest communities in the country being condemned to higher taxes or devastating austerity. We need support. So will the PM commit his ministers to work across government to fix this for Hartlepool?
Well, it's because of strong local Labour MPs, but like my honourable friend, that towns like Hartlepool, treated as an afterthought by the party opposite, are having their future restored. We're making billions more available so that councils can properly fund social care. And we're driving down the cost of living for parents and their children, including 3 free breakfast clubs in his constituency, over 3,000 children no longer incapacitated by the 2-child limit. That's the difference a Labour government makes.
Mr. Speaker, my residents are sick of being let down by Thames Water. Robert and Patricia were sent a £39,000 bill they didn't actually owe. Len and Jenny were forced to use the Portaloo for months as sewage filled their home, and parents still think twice about sending their children to swim in the river. Now, we understand a £16 billion rescue deal is soon to cross the Prime Minister's desk. Will he admit today what everyone already knows? That Thames Water is dead in the water. Any delay is pointless, and it should be allowed to be put out of its misery and rebuilt as a company for public benefit.
Yeah! Can I thank her for raising that, and I know how much and important it is for her constituents. We have taken measures in relation to strengthening oversight and the control that we have. We won't hesitate to go further, and I'll make sure she gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was a privilege that weekend to join fellow North East MPs on the destroyer HMS Duncan, to meet the crew and also be briefed on the exciting plans for the innovative future of the Royal Navy. A future that should be bright, given the £10 billion frigate deal with Norway, but also a future we absolutely want our region to be part of. So would the Prime Minister agree that given the North East strengths in AI, satellite technology and advanced manufacturing, North East workers and businesses should be at the heart of the future hybrid navy, and will ministers meet us and industry leaders to put the North East at the heart of our future defence?
Mr. Speaker, can I first thank the commanding officer and crew of HMS Duncan for their service, and thank my honourable friend. I remember meeting the brilliant workforce in his region, and I know the defence ministers would be delighted to do the same. Our record defence spending is supporting jobs and growth across the North East. We invested £200 million in optic semiconductors in his constituency last year. As we increase defence spending, the North East will play a major role securing good skilled jobs for generations to come.
Christine Jarvie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate myself with the comments of my party leader about Lord Wallace, a man I feel I was privileged to know. But can I ask the Prime Minister, given the conversations which are taking place in this place today and up and down the country about Peter Mandelson and his involvement with the paedophile who trafficked women, and the millions of women, particularly in this country, who will have been triggered by that, given the establishment's proximity to what happened, will the Prime Minister assure that there will be support set up, helplines, and that as well as the victims, the direct victims, those indirect women who've been triggered now will be supported?
Well, she's right to raise this, and obviously we'll support the police on the one hand with their investigation, but also we will press on with our work to halve violence against women and girls, which is very much about putting the support in place that is needed for all victims of violence. That is a crucial part of our work, and I hope we can work across the House in support of it.
Ellen Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud that Labour MPs voted yesterday to remove the 2-child limit and lift children out of poverty. But child poverty cannot be eradicated while children are living in overcrowded temporary accommodation without their own bed or anywhere to do their homework. So will the Prime Minister commit to urgent and persistent action to drive down the use of temporary accommodation, ensuring that our councils, including my councils of Lambeth and Southwark, have the funding they need in the final local government finance settlement next week?
Well, can I join her in the pride in voting to remove 500,000 children from poverty and lift them out of poverty after hundreds of thousands were plunged into poverty by the party opposite when they were in government. On the point she raised about temporary accommodation, she's right that every child deserves a safe, warm and secure home. We're investing a record £3.5 billion in homelessness services and £950 million in local authority housing fund to deliver better quality temporary accommodation.
Mr. Speaker, how we answer SEND families' call for justice will measure who we are. Christopher Lascaris was autistic and murdered aged 24. His mother, Fiona, who is here, spent 8 years begging authorities to protect him, but they refused because they presumed he had mental capacity. So will the Prime Minister support Christopher's law, creating a duty to assess mental capacity where it is in doubt to save the lives of others?
Can I thank him for his question and for his tireless campaigning on behalf of Christopher and Fiona, who, as he points out, is with us today. Christopher's death was a tragedy, and I agree that we owe it to Fiona. I'm glad that she's here to hear it, and other families, of course, to get this right. I can reassure him that work is underway to examine what action is necessary to prevent further tragedies like this. That comes alongside our intention to consult on the liberty protection safeguards this year, and I'll make sure that he is fully updated on as the work progresses across government, and I would ask that he make sure that Fiona and others are updated as well.
Ben Goldsborough.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. From heat-tolerant rice trials to world-leading science at the Earlham Institute and the John Innes Centre on the Norwich Research Park, South Norfolk is helping feed the world. Will the Prime Minister secure a clear carve-out for precision breeding in any future SBS agreement with the EU so Britain can continue to lead on this field?
Well, can I thank him for raising it? As negotiations are ongoing, we remain committed, you'll be pleased to know, to the Precision Breeding Act and supporting new innovative technologies. And the EU accepts there will need to be areas where we retain our own rules, and we'll always prioritise British interests as we negotiate our SBS agreement.
Caroline Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, as you're aware, I've been campaigning for a Lincoln Dental School for some years, and I'm pleased to be able to tell the House that thanks to the hard work of, amongst others, Professor Juster, Professor Reid and Susie McPherson, Lincoln Medical School are now in a position to take their first cohort from 2027. So can I ask the Prime Minister, will he provide the necessary funding for this cohort of students to start to help improve the oral health of people right across Lincolnshire?
Well, I'm pleased to hear the news about the dental school in her constituency, and we have put in further funding in relation to dentistry. We were left with a dental desert across many parts of the country. We're fixing that problem, but I'm glad to hear the news in her constituency.
Polly Billings.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Prime Minister pointed out, today is World Cancer Day. As outlined in our cancer plan, early detection and diagnosis is vital. Will the Prime Minister agree to consider the campaign by my constituent Gemma Reeves, who is a nurse at the Queen Elizabeth Queen Mother Hospital, to ensure breast cancer screening for all women over the age of 40, and meet her to discuss how such a change would save lives?
Well, I'd absolutely support that, and I'll make sure she gets a meeting with the relevant minister, because early diagnosis is so important for all cancers, and we must do everything we can to ensure that our early diagnosis is the absolute norm and never the default.
Final question, Suella Brown.
Give her a moment.
I recently met one of the bravest women I know. Elizabeth was 14 when she was raped in Rotherham.
She is one of the survivors of the rape gangs, one of the biggest national scandals in our history. Whilst her first rapist was convicted and sentenced, Ashgar Bostan, she was subsequently, shockingly, allegedly abused by police officers serving in South Yorkshire Police. One of those officers remains on active service today. Elizabeth made complaint through Operation Linden. None of them were followed up. She rightly feels betrayed and failed by the very institution designed to protect her. Will the Prime Minister meet with Elizabeth, rape gang survivors and myself to commit that those who committed and covered up these abhorrent offences are put behind bars where they belong?
Well, I'm deeply concerned about the facts she's just outlined, and if she could give us all the details of that, I'll make sure that there is a relevant meeting and follow-up in relation to those concerns.
Point of order, Sir David Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today's debate will focus on Mandelson and his relationship with the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. However, it will not cover his relationship with another alleged paedophile, murderer, gangster, specialist in bribery and corruption, and Putin favourite, Oleg Deripaska, a relationship that may be just as bad as that with Epstein. As European Trade Commissioner, Mandelson made decisions favouring Deripaska's company by $200 million a year. Mandelson avoided proper investigation by lying about the timing of his relationship with Deripaska. Mr. Speaker, how can we find out when investigations were carried out before Gordon Brown and his government appointed Mandelson as a minister? Do you agree this House needs to see this information? If so, how can we obtain it?
What I would say is, look, this is a very experienced member, and I know he'll pursue this through the many avenues, and I know there is a debate later in which he may wish to catch the chair's eye in order to raise these issues. These are very serious issues that he's raised, and this will be taken seriously, and I'm sure that the front bench has heard it as well. I will leave it at that. Wonderful.
Thank you ever so much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said that in each humble address that his party laid in opposition, they mentioned national security. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has left. However, I have checked the two most recent humble addresses laid by the Labour Party when they're in opposition, and all members on those benches should be very aware the words national security do not feature even once, because it is not necessary in a humble address. So, Mr. Speaker, how do we get the Prime Minister to correct the record when he's just chosen to leave the room?
Don't be ridiculous. Can I just say to you, you put it on the record. This, I don't want to continue the debate, but you put it on the record, so it's there. Right. Wonderful, Church.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Now, the Prime Minister, in response to me just now, appeared to deny ever being instructed by disgraced lawyer Phil Shiner. Yet I have here the 2007 case of Al Jeddah versus the Secretary of State for Defence, where it quite clearly says appellants instructed by public interest lawyers include one Keir Starmer QC.
Perhaps the Prime Minister might want to return to the House and clarify his earlier remarks.
I'm not here to continue a debate. You put it on the record, we will leave it at that. Right. We'll let the front benches change over.
Could you just briefly explain employers' legal obligations to carry out right-to-work checks at the moment?
Sure. So the right-to-work checking system has been around for decades and has probably over the last 20-odd years adapted and changed in the fact that the penalties have become more draconian as we've gone along, and the responsibilities that the employers carry have become more onerous in many ways. What the premise of the system is that an employer should carry out a right-to-work check before somebody starts work. in order to gain what we call a statutory excuse from a civil penalty. And what that means that if it emerges later down the line that somebody in fact doesn't have the right to work in the UK, if they've carried out their right to work check correctly and compliantly, they will be able to defend themselves from a civil penalty. But the way of carrying out right to work checks has changed and has had to adapt, because we've gone from a system which 10 years ago was largely paper-based, where most right to work checks would be carried out via just a check of somebody's passport and a photocopy being taken. But now, with the advent of digital immigration status and e-visas, there's had to be new methods found to carry out right to work checks. So in 2019, we had the introduction of the online right to work checking system, or the share code system as it's more colloquially known, which is used now for checking e-visas. So as we stand, we now have, an employer is faced with three methods they have to choose from to carry out a right to work check, depending on the type of status or nationality of an individual. An employer can still carry out what we call a manual right to work check, which is a paper-based check, and that's largely really now pretty much limited to British and Irish nationals and certain people with paper-based forms of immigration status. They can carry out this online right to work check that's been around for a few years, and that's exclusively for those with time-limited permission or e-visas. And then there's the new kid on the block from the right to work perspective is the DVS check, the Digital Verification Service check, which is the first time that an employer can actually use a third party to carry out right to work checks for them, and that's for your members, David. And that will still give them the all-important statutory excuse which they need to defend the civil penalty, but that is only available if it's used for British and Irish nationals. So hopefully from that summary you've seen, it's quite a complicated system that we have right now, and it's a lot for an employer to juggle. And the backdrop is that you've obviously got increasing levels of compliance action by the Home Office, and the consequences are becoming more severe as well with the increase in the civil penalty.
Thanks. So just in terms of the Home Office oversight point, could you just outline what circumstances the Home Office currently has oversight of whether employers have carried out those checks?
Well, essentially on a day-to-day basis, not unless they come or audit a business. If it's for an employer to carry out right to work checks, it's about ensuring they have the audit trail if they are ever requested to demonstrate the right to work, and that could come about particularly if an employer has a sponsor license and employs sponsored workers. Any company that holds a sponsor license is at risk of a Home Office visit or audit at any point. So the Home Office could request that information or could do a spot check and see it at that point. For a business which didn't have a sponsor license, the risk of getting an audit and a visit is much more reduced, but it's increased depending on the sector they work in. The health and care sector are obviously one which is more at risk of Home Office compliance action. Hospitality, restaurants, things like that. But for certain businesses, they may never encounter a Home Office visit, or haven't for decades, if ever. But one way that the Home Office is changing their approach is they're now being a little bit more targeted in how they're carrying out compliance action. So they're utilising methods such as data sharing with HMRC. So what they'll do is they are able to, at the minute, is when somebody's visa has expired, they will check data with HMRC. They'll be able to see quite clearly whether an employer has carried on employing somebody beyond that visa expiry date, and then they can send the employer a civil penalty notice to say, we believe this person has been employed illegally. So we're kind of moving away from this idea of Home Office visits to a more kind of paper-based way of compliance action.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah, so you talked about the triggers that there be an investigation by the Home Office. What, and some of that I'm sure is intelligence based. So how to see whether the right to work check has been carried out? Would you say that that's a true assessment by the French?
I think it's much more complicated than that. I think there are other reasons why we may be an easier place for illegal working to take place. I think there's issues surrounding the fact that illegal working can be carried out in worker relationships that aren't necessarily employment. So we look at the kind of gig economy and things like that. And then there's a separate piece of legislation that's already passed last year, which is going to extend out the remit of right-to-work checks beyond that employment relationship to other forms of worker status. That is likely to make a difference. But I don't. It's hard to say whether that's the real key issue, that the government that there is no real exact oversight whether employers are carrying out right-to-work checks on a daily basis for each and every worker. That they get what kind of controls and manages the system, or the incentive on the system, is the fear of the penalty, and the penalty has increased. So a few years ago it was a 20k per illegal worker. You're now up to 60k per illegal worker, and it is that acts as the deterrent and the impetus to abide by the rules of the system.
Peter Princely.
So, do you have a sort of idea in your head? Sorry, I'm Peter Princely, MP, Bury St Edmunds, Stowmarket. This fine of £60,000 that how often? I mean, are there thousands of people being found £60,000 a year, or is it just an occasionally?
It's freely available. You can look it up on gov.uk. There is a list there of businesses who've received civil penalties, so they are named and shamed, so to speak. So you can see it, and there are, I don't have them available, but I could provide them, but there are definitely statistics showing how many civil penalties have been given, and they are on the increase significantly from where they were, say, 2 or 3 years ago. We're seeing many more civil penalties being issued.
Okay.
Chris Murray.
Thank you. I want to ask a bit about the impact that right to work checks have. So to my mind, there's sort of 3 categories of people. There's people who do the right to work checks, they follow the rules, and that's great. There's people who try to follow the rules, but they're complicated and they make a mistake. And there's people who don't follow the rules and don't do right to work checks at all. So my first question is, and I'll start with you, Alex, and then open it up to the rest. What is the impact of right to work checks? How significant is the burden of compliance?
Yeah, well, of course, the vast majority of members, or every member that we have spoken to about this, fall in the category of either do it entirely correctly or are doing their absolute best in a system that can be quite complex. The short answer is the impact varies. It seems that the system in many cases works fairly well in what I would term as a more sort of classic employment scenario. So I'm thinking about, for example, where an employer has a physical office presence, people regularly work from that location, and they predominantly hire British and Irish nationals because they typically will do paper checks, which even if they're not entirely the most efficient approach, they're well understood and clearly demonstrate compliance. So I've had feedback from a director of HR at a large painting and decorating company who told us that most of their staff are British, they don't find right to work checks an issue, they understand it well. They did note that the few times that they've used it for non-nationals, it was relatively straightforward, but required a degree of relearning each time because of the infrequency with which they engaged with the system. However, once you step outside of that kind of more classic employment scenario, whereby employers can easily get someone to bring a passport into copy, it can become more complex for employers to navigate. So we've heard from a director of an HR consultancy who told us that they think that the checks are clunky, inconsistent, and often outsourced at cost, especially for smaller employers. We heard from a director of a small company who said they agree that the current system is confusing and hard to manage. They referred to the fact that they have employees on working visas whose ID cards state that their right to work has expired, even though that's not the case. And we've also heard from members who feel that the government currently unfairly places the entire burden on employers without sufficient support. So one member said to us, the onus currently is on the employer to ensure that documentation isn't fake. There's only so much employers can do. There needs to be more support from government. So I'd say that the current system does represent a burden for many employers, and we think that digital IDs have a role to play in addressing this, but I'm sure we can come on to this later. We're concerned about the current policy direction with regards to digital ID.
Okay, thank you very much, because one of the things that we've heard is that often employers make mistakes or struggle to navigate the system. So 80% of employers, according to the Home Office, got one compliance question wrong. 81% of employers incorrectly thought that recruitment agencies checked agency worker status. 70% of employers in the construction industry accept a driving licence, which isn't evidence of right to work. So how confident are you that your members or employers general can check that someone's got the right to work?
I think the risk, as you've identified, is that employers will think that they are meeting the legal requirements when they're actually not. So in terms of confidence that the system as a whole is working as it should, probably relatively low. That's partly about employer awareness. It's partly around more complex employer-employee relationships, for example, the gig economy, which will soon come into scope. Like I said, where the relationship is more simple, employers mostly know how to navigate it. But there are certainly instances where it's more difficult for them. I think you'll often find for much smaller companies, particularly where they don't have in-house HR capacity, they will struggle much more than larger companies to get this right.
Okay, thank you. And just opening it out to the rest of the panel, what problems do you think employers encounter in fulfilling their legal obligations? Because, and what do you think about this sort of argument? We've got a lot of people who are following the law, putting a lot of effort in. Well, first of all, they're employing people legally, and then they're putting in a lot of effort just to prove that fact, but they can prove it. Then there's some people struggling to navigate the system and making lots of mistakes, and it not being clear to them whether they're breaking the law or not. And then there's people who the system's actually trying to target, that they're actually trying to cut down on, who just sort of like not participating in the system overall. So the system's focusing on the wrong set of people. What do you think about that?
Well, that's quite a big question.
We like asking big questions.
Trying to put that as a short answer is going to be probably hard. So I think I just want to pick up on something that Joanna said, which I think is quite important to this, and because you referenced small businesses, is that the offence is employing illegal workers, not doing a right to work check. And the reason why that's relevant is that if you're a local electrician in South London and you're employing your mate's son, who you know since he was 3 years old, you know that person is a British citizen. So the risk to that firm is low. So firms need to take a risk-based decision. But obviously, when you're getting into larger organisations in the way that Alex is talking about, it would be a very high-risk endeavour not to have a system for doing right-to-work checks, because you don't know who you're employing in those larger organisations. Now, the issue, again, that both Alex and Joanne have said is that it is complex for frontline staff to do this. Usually they're relatively low-paid staff that are doing this, and they're expected to know quite a lot about checking documents if they're doing it manually. So there's a fear aspect, because sitting behind getting that decision wrong is the fines that Joanne spoke about. So one of the things that we are trying to encourage the government on is promoting further the DVS sector, because while there is a cost, as Alex says, it brings consistency and reliability into an otherwise manual process. And that technology can be used to support face-to-face checks as well as just remote checks as what's going on. And that gives a consistent, standardised way of handling the process, and takes a lot of the burden away from those frontline staff that are being asked to do that. But there is another point that you just raised, right, which I think is the thing that is actually troubling us, is what is the problem that's trying to be solved, right? Because a digital ID isn't necessarily going to solve the issues around right to work, and the issues that sit around that, whether it's illegal working, whether it's helping people back to work, people that are excluded from the economy, whether it's black market employers, impersonation checks, particularly, fraudulent documents and such like. A digital ID isn't necessarily, a government-issued digital ID isn't necessarily going to help in that process. It requires a wider community aspect, and you would be not surprised to hear that we think that the private sector is mobilised, already doing that work, and has intelligence on fraud and impersonation that we would like to share with the Home Office, but there is no one to share it with.
Thank you. Joanna, do you want to come in on that?
I mean, I'll just echo the thoughts that David and Alex have said. It truly is a very complex system, with penalties that are for making even minor mistakes are severe. So if an employer fails to carry out the right to work check before somebody starts work, maybe does it later on the very same day somebody started work, technically that would be an uncompliant right to work check. So if there was any issue down the line with that person being an illegal worker, that right to work check would not defend a civil penalty. If somebody failed to put a date on a copy of a manual check, that would be enough to render it uncompliant, and then it would be able to be used to defend a civil penalty. So I think you're right to characterise those three groups, actually. There are those employers who are trying their very best to meet these kind of levels are expected by the Home Office, and they tend to be, as Alex says, the big companies who have dedicated HR teams, often with a few subject matter experts who can keep up with the pace of change that we're seeing from a policy perspective in the immigration space. Then it's those who struggle, and if you were ever to look at the list of businesses who have civil penalties, it's not the big names that are on there, it's small businesses, takeaways, restaurants, who don't have HR, who maybe have the best of intentions, but are unable to really manage this system correctly. So yes, I do agree that the burden is being placed unfairly on others more than other groups.
And just finally, what's your view on the use of paper documents? Because obviously quite a lot of smaller businesses and legacy employees will still be paper. Does that have a big impact in 2026?
Well, you go first.
A lot of my employers will still use manual right to work checks. There's definitely been a significant shift away from using physical paper-based checks, particularly since the pandemic, and the need to have a way of checking right to work remotely. Most of the employers that we work with are very happy with the online share code system, and some of them use DVS providers as well and are generally happy with those services. But there are some businesses who still will use paper-based checks, and for instance, depending on the sector, they very much have to. I mean, I was working with a company, a winery, who had to employ pickers, and they were telling me that nobody has a passport, so they have to check right to work via a birth certificate and an NI number, which is still a valid form of right to work evidence. And the fear is, with this move towards purely digital right to work checks, even with the kind of the concession that's being made that biometric passports will be acceptable, is you're going to exclude people who don't have passports, who are still a significant portion of the population.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just pick up on that. So under the existing codes from the Home Office, we can only accept remotely for checks. We can only accept in-date British or Irish passports and Irish cards, passport cards. So if the passport's out of date or someone has any other documentation like a birth certificate and such like, we can't accept that remotely. That has to be done by a face-to-face check. So you know, as you'll be aware, the way that the legislation is written is that the worker has a choice about how they present that right to work thing. I think it's quite an important principle to retain. But I would flip it the other way. So your question the other way. So, you know, we've got examples where we're working with recruitment agencies that are particularly at the lower end of the employment market, you know, the fruit pickers type thing. And you know, they're dealing with situations where they may have a phone call from a local factory or whatever, and they've got to find, you know, 5 workers to go out that evening, that sort of stuff. Now, because one of the other documents that you can accept remotely is the share code, the e-visa system. They will more likely place someone who's on an e-visa code out to those immediate requirements, because a British citizen who just has a birth certificate has to come into the office, you know, has to have their details checked before they can actually place. So that puts a friction into the system, which arguably discriminates against the British workers that don't have the right documentation to do a remote check. So I think there's an alternative spin, which is that digital ID for those workers will actually help get people into employment.
Doesn't that pick up on Joe's point earlier of the advantages of a labour market being very flexible and informal is you can fill spaces quite easily, and the labour market can adapt within hours to find pickers. The downside of it is that's how it's the vulnerability of it. Just it's a trade-off between those two, isn't it? Do you accept that the two are two sides of the same coin?
Well, so yes, right. So the question is, how do you deal with that quickly and effectively, right? And obviously that's why we're here having this debate and such like. But even if things go well with the government-issued identity, you're not looking at that to be used for right to work for a number of years yet, right? Now, one of the restrictions that we have within the trust framework is that after one of our members has done a right to work check, is that check expires after 3 months, which makes sense in the case of a share code. But when you're dealing with someone who you know is a British citizen, there's no reason why we couldn't reissue a reusable digital identity, a reusable right to work identity issued by the private sector. And, you know, there's mechanics to do that. There's suppliers already in the market to do that. And, you know, that can be enacted, you know, this year at relatively low cost to the taxpayer. So there are alternatives that government should look at, as well as just doing a government-issued digital ID.
Thank you.
So we're joined today by the Chair of the Science and Technology Committee, so Dave Chin Unwara.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for enabling me to guest on this inquiry. And I'm very interested in the costs and implications of the transition to mandatory digital right-to-work checks. And so, particularly, I'll start with you, David Crack. I understand that 23% of employer right-to-work checks use your members. Can you tell us a little bit about what the costs are to the employer? And what the we've heard a little bit about what the benefits are in the comparison to a paper-based checks.
Yeah. Okay. So that figure of 23%, I think, was originally came from some evidence that we provided to the Home Office originally, and there's not reliable stats on it.
Really?
So no, there isn't, because we don't know how many right-to-work checks are being done in the UK to actually know what that's a percentage of. What we do know is that most of the large employers, as Alex was referring to, will be using some sort of system, and you know, we are generally engaged with the larger employers. The area that is less clear is to do with the small, medium-sized businesses, where there isn't necessarily the stats. And although each employer is employing a smaller number of people, there are a greater proportion of them in the economy, of course. Yeah. So that's what gives the difficulty on the statistics. In the question of costs, the costs vary quite considerably, actually. So they literally can go from nothing when it's part and parcel of another pre-employment check to, if it's being a standalone check, of being somewhere around about £1 to some cases £6 if it's going via different providers. So there is a selection in the market, and employers can do their own research and make their mind up.
So if I'm a small business and I want to use a digital verification provider, it could cost me between £1 and £6 per...
Yeah, so what there will be is what varies in the market is that sometimes there's a registration fee, a set-up fee, which may be a few £100, or there might be a minimum spend to just make that transaction worthwhile.
And does that business need to have digital infrastructure? Do they need to have secure web providers or something like that in addition?
It depends again on who the provider is. Right. So some of our providers are giving web-based services that will integrate into an onboarding journey that's run by an employer. Others are standalone, completely standalone. And would be using an app-based approach.
Right. Okay. We're going to see there might be a challenge for small businesses. Alex Hall-Chen, are any of your members currently using digital forms of right-to-work checks? And is that increasing efficiency? And what are the costs that you see involved?
Yeah, so we don't have data on the exact proportion of our members who are using digital right-to-work checks, but I would say that anecdotally, when I'm talking to our members who do tend to predominantly be from SMEs, they don't typically refer to them. When we say right to work checks, they will start talking about paper checks. Of course, where they hire migrants, they will be using digital share codes because that's compulsory. But I'd say the sort of Home Office research that was alluded to earlier, around 79% of businesses still using paper checks, would roughly align with the impression that we get. I think from our perspective, the introduction of the option of digital checks via IDSPs has been welcome. I can see scenarios where, especially,
It's for a government to roll out a digital ID is a big program, right? It's a big undertaking, and one of the issues that comes up with under the trust framework, where you start having personal control over your data, there's huge uplift to the economy, a lot of benefits for individual organisations. But it also means a massive change to the way that back office systems work, right? So when you're looking at it from a government point of view or a GDS point of view, those back office systems are not a minor thing to change, right? The private sector can deliver the digital identity and deliver, the benefits that we were talking about around more control of your data. It's a better use of resources to use the private sector to do that. So it's a design choice.
So you're not confident that the Home Office will find this easy to do? You're saying the private sector would, Home Office possibly not?
There's the tech issue, which is challenging, right? But there's also the human rights, social issue, right? There's huge, massive resistance against it, right? So which you'll probably hear about in a second, right? That resistance doesn't exist with the private sector. The reason why the Crosby Poor report came about, the reason why this has been developed over those 17 years, is it's because of the privacy lobby. Right, how can we do this better in the UK in the way that we're doing it? That's why the trust framework came about, right? It's been a long time in the making. It's quite a big ask to ask a government organisation to catch up on 17 years worth of investment into what is now an operational industry.
I'm going to have to bring it to a close, I think, now. I'm very grateful to the panel for your time and for being with us today and for the answers to the questions and the evidence you've submitted previously. But I will bring this first panel to an end and go on to the second panel. There'll just be a short break while we change over with the panellists. But thank you again. Order. I need to... Order. Right, we now have a proceeding going on. I have to say that, otherwise it's not a parliamentary proceeding. Thank you very much to our second panel. Could I ask you to introduce yourself, starting with you, Kuba.
Hello, my name is Kuba Błonowski. I'm a lecturer in digital sociology at the University of Bristol, and I was a co-investigator on a research grant that researched the transition to e-visas at the initial stage, which was still the EU settlement scheme. It was a project funded by the Economic and Social Research Council.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting us here. My name is Monique Hawkins. I'm Head of Policy and Advocacy at the 3 Million. The 3 Million was set up after the EU referendum to represent EU citizens, and EU citizens were the first cohort that were we called it the guinea pigs for the e-visa system, which is now rolled out to 10 million people.
Thank you very much. We're going to start questioning with Joe White.
Well, thank you very much for coming today. So the rollout of any new government scheme is always fraught with difficulties. It always has the bumps and checks that have to go along. But how effective do you think has it been for the rollout for the e-visa system? What have been the challenges?
Well, that probably depends from whose perspective. From the Home Office perspective, the rollout was indeed quite efficient. Before Brexit, EU citizens were not registered on any kind of database. They didn't have any form of regulation of their immigration status. Digitization enabled a very quick process of registering millions of people onto the system. So in that sense, in terms of the bulk, it was quite effective. But that also means that errors, if they occur, they also occur at scale. And this is a problem from the user perspective. So from the user's perspective, we've seen a lot of people whose status, we undoubtedly seen a lot of people who applied very quickly for status, got it granted quickly, but we also saw hundreds of thousands of people who were stuck in backlogs for a number of years. And then we also saw a number of people who weren't able to prove their immigration status through View and Prove. And this is, I think, the key difference to tease out from the perspective of the Home Office. Those things are marginal, but a marginal problem in a system that has 10 million people in it may be affecting hundreds of thousands of people at one time. So in my work, in my research work, I focus on those glitches or systemic problems in e-visas to understand how the system works and how it could potentially work better.
Yeah, so from our point of view, I have a feeling that the e-visas, that Brexit basically provided an opportunity to introduce e-visas, but they were really, really rushed. There was a very small beta trial done in 2018, really tiny. It got of digital right to work checks. It was audited by Government Digital Services, and the comments were, yes, this is fine as far as it goes, but you need to do much further checking. You need to do testing with people who are not who are digitally excluded. It is definitely not okay to get rid of physical documents in favour of this digital system. And there was never any other pilot or anything. They just went for it at that point. I think, would it be helpful for the panel if we kind of explained what an e-visa check actually involves? Because people might think, oh, it's just easy, you produce a share code. Mm-hmm. But we have graphics that go over 2 pages that show the actual steps involved. And just very briefly, you need to find the right website. This is as the individual trying to prove their status. You've got to go on there, you've got to put in an identity number, which is usually your latest passport number. It's not a stable number like a national insurance number throughout your life. It can change, and that itself causes problems. You enter that, you enter your date of birth. If you're lucky and the system recognises your details, then you get sent a code on either your phone or by email, which you then have to put in. Then you get to see your status. Then you press a button to say, I want to produce a share code. Then it asks you what type of share code, because there's multiple types. Then eventually you get the share code, which is like a 9-digit alphanumeric code. You then give that to the employer, who then has to find a different website, not the same one you just used, put that in with your date of birth, and then it will say you've got the right to work. Now, because there's so many steps, it can and absolutely does go wrong at every single one of those steps. So you've got a cohort for people for whom it will never work because they're very digitally excluded, and there are, I've got statistics from Digital Nation. There's even this year there's still 8 million people who just lack digital skills. You've got situations where it will never work for anyone, which is when there's no Wi-Fi or no connectivity to the internet, because the Home Office insists it has to be a live check. And then there are a lot of people for whom their individual record has been broken in some way. And like several years ago, for example, we started reporting on cases where somebody would log in and they were lucky enough to actually get through and see a status, but their status had been mixed up with that of someone else. It would have someone else's photograph and their own name, or the other way around, or it would have someone else's expiry date, or something was wrong about it, which basically at that point renders the entire right to work invalid, because as Joanna was explaining earlier, you also have to do that impersonation check. So if your photograph is wrong, and we have examples of people who, there was a woman working for a large corporation who basically got instant dismissal because they were doing a repeat right to work check, and it magically suddenly showed the photograph of her sister. And so there's, things go wrong in all those steps, not just like that. And that would be okay if there was a very effective mitigation on solving those problems. But we just see countless reports of people who report the problem and it takes months to fix. And the Home Office have not been transparent about the level of errors that are reported to them. There's been lots of parliamentary questions. They've refused to divulge that. We have a report where we've tried to estimate the number of people who are affected. Because we've got two sort of specific incidents where we can compare the number of reports we got with a true number, we think for every report we get, there's probably 500 people affected by that. So given that over the last few years we've had close to 2,000 reports, we've come up with a figure that we think it could be close to 1 million people who've had impact at some point. The Home Office say they don't recognise that figure, but they're not prepared to give any figures of their own.
And to perhaps just come in and explain, some of those errors are indeed errors where two status cards are getting mixed up. So someone else's photo appears in your status card or someone else's name appears there. But some of them stem from the programmed function of the system. So for example, there were errors where people were putting a new application under the EU settlement scheme to upgrade from pre-settled status to settled status. And then the system was displaying their status as pending application rather than showing them as pre-settled status holders. And when we queried that with the government, Minister Kevin Foster at the time said the issue was caused by the logic by which our status services react to casework events such as applications or grants of status. When the problem was occurring, it was because our services logic was to overwrite old statuses with a new one, because we believe this would be the most relevant one to display. We have changed the logic in response to feedback. So some of those problems are directly caused by the way the system operates and by the way it was designed to show the real life immigration status, and that quite often cannot be automatically calculated.
So you identified lots and lots of errors, and I'm quite shocked to hear that. So, and you're saying the government isn't listening to the errors you're identifying. Has the government actually taken any steps to rectify some of those problems, or any of those problems that you've listed or detailed?
I don't think it's true to say they're not listening. I just think the scale of the problem is so enormous. So as a result of various advocacy and other pressures on our part, there is a forum now that is dedicated to e-visa problems that we attend sort of once every 6 weeks or so, which is a very constructive forum, and we bring problems to that. We also have an escalation route through that, where if we think we've identified new types of problems that look systemic, or we see problems where people have tried to get it resolved via the normal routes and they're really desperate, very vulnerable, we can get cases escalated. And so I think that team genuinely tries to, A, fix those individuals' problems, but also tries to look at where the system can be improved. But at the same time, it is still the case that if you report a problem via the reporting tool, on the Home Office's reporting tool, you will still get an auto-reply to say, due to the volume of reports we're getting in, we're unable to reply within the normal 2 weeks. That's been the case ever since late 2023. And it is still the case that they're not willing to say how many error reports there've been. And through a Freedom of Information request, we found out that in a 12-month period, I've lost the number now, but there were there were 483,000 calls made to the e-visa resolution call centre over a 12-month period, and lots of those calls were not able to be answered because people had to be on the line for so long and couldn't get through. So we just have no oversight of how vast the problem is. And as Kuba was saying, they're continually changing the logic. The whole system is still labelled as a beta system, even 6 years on. Well, no, 8 years on, because it started in 2018. Every time there are problems, fixes are introduced, which sometimes cause further problems. I mean, you may know that in the EU settlement scheme, there are automated processes to extend people's pre-settled status as it comes up to expiry. There's also some, and what we found was a whole section of several thousand people, I think it was in March last year, who had achieved settled status, and then suddenly they looked online, they'd gone back to pre-settled status. So there's quite a lot of these system-wide bugs that are caused by trying to fix other problems introduced. So the whole thing is fragile.
And I think to understand just why it works like that, it's useful to think about it not as a system, but there's a number of systems linked together. If you look at the View and Proof website, you will see a singularity. It does say beta on it if you go and Google it now. But that's just the interface. Behind the system, there are over 90 different casework systems from which information is drawn in real time. The biometric information is in a different system to immigration records. Some identity details are in a different system. And that's, to us, that's the source of the problem. And the government is doing, or the Home Office is doing nothing to address that. So if you think about immigration documentation, in the past we had the kind of singularity of a biometric residence card. If you think about digital documents, we had this fantastic COVID passes. The QR code is invisible because it now expired, but it still sits on my phone. I can screenshot it, I can WhatsApp it to you, I can generate a new COVID pass should there be a need in the NHS app. But that works with a singular NHS number. In all those 90 case working systems, there is no single stable user identifier. So the system is computing the identity of the person whose status is being checked on the fly at the time of generating and checking the share code. And this is we see those errors. This is we see the problems where somebody else's details suddenly pop up in your account because the system confuses people or it assigns the wrong status to the user that is querying it.
Peter Prinsley.
I was just interested in what you just said. I'm Peter Prinsley, MP for Bury St Edmund and Stowmarket, about the NHS number. Mm-hmm. So everybody has an NHS number. They're issued with an NHS number when they're born. And anybody who accesses NHS services has an NHS number. So is it not the case that we already do have a digital ID called the NHS number? And would this not be the obvious solution to much of the difficulties we've been discussing all morning?
People who are born abroad obviously would not have the NHS number. They would have to apply for it. But and it's not to me to prescribe a solution, I suppose, but I originally come from Poland. We are born with a personal ID number, all the biometric records, all the immigration records, a lot of welfare and health records. I attached to that number indeed. So in December, I had to go to pharmacy, get some prescription drugs. I just recited my personal ID number. I showed my ID card, and that was sufficient to get the prescription. There was no